Okay. Let's do this one. Oh, that should say November 2nd, right? Oh my goodness. Today we are going right to the top. Today, welcome to my studio. My name's Michael Markowsky. Today we're going to paint another painting by another one of my favorite artists of all time. We are going, as I said, right to the boss at the very, 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 very top of the pyramid. We are going to be looking at Rembrandt van Rijn. And Rembrandt is acknowledged by many people as the greatest painter of all time. At least arguably from a technical point of view, there's pretty hard to find another person who was as knowledgeable and competent and skilled of an artist as he was. So I'll just say right off the top, if you're watching this video because you want to know the actual technical way that Rembrandt made his paintings, there's lots of other videos that cover it in excruciating, painful depth. We're not going to explore that side of his painting today. I'm going to roughly approximate some of his techniques using acrylic paint. Again, this is 400 years before acrylic paint even existed. So even there, we're talking apples and oranges, right? I'll talk a little bit about what I know during the as we paint, but we're not going to be mixing our own pigments and grinding, all that kind of stuff. No, we're not doing that today. Anyway, this is the painting that we are going to recreate. It's a self-portrait from 1628. So again, basically almost 400 years ago, he created this painting at, I think, age 21, 22, 23. And we're not exactly sure exactly when there, but that's pretty close enough after 400 years, right? And I'll also let you know that there is a free outline that you can download from the Dropbox. I did this outline on my iPad Pro using the Procreate app. And so I'm going to show you where to find these here in a moment. There's also another painting in the outline for it, in the original one here, Man in a Gourd with a Plumed Cap. I love this painting as well. And I might do this painting at a different time. Obviously, it's a little bit more complicated. But anyway, if you want to do that painting, you want to do two of them, roll up your sleeves and get at it. So if you want to download that outline, and I'm going to show you how to transfer it onto a canvas in a moment. It's very easy to do, and there's lots of different ways to do it. But you'll see in this Dropbox link in the video description below, you'll see these are all paintings we've already done. A couple of contemporaries or artists of the classical era that may interest you. Way back up here, we did Leonardo da Vinci. Who's someone else? Goya was a couple hundred years later, obviously. And Titian, I saw down here. Where's Titian? We looked at just maybe a couple months ago. Arcimboldo would have preceded, or maybe not too much earlier than Rembrandt. But then we get down to here, and just as a heads up, these are all the other paintings coming down the pipeline over the next little while here, taking us all the way up until New Year's Eve of 2021. So we click in here, Rembrandt, and again, you'll see 6 files. There's 2 versions of each of the outlines. One's a JPEG, one's a PDF. Before I show you how to do that, I just want to let you know that there is a private Facebook group just for people who are painting along with me and with us, because there's a large group of great community people who join this group. I also just mention for every episode, I spend about 5-6 hours at minimum doing research, and I write up a little biography and introduction to each painting. So if you want to read those, join the Facebook group, and that kind of helps give you a little bit of a background to each painting. And then, of course, people post their versions of the paintings that we've been working on. So here's Gail's version of Vincent van Gogh's skeleton with a burning cigarette that we did just a couple days ago. And Also, here's the Picasso by Gail as well, that we did a few weeks ago, and then also work that you might be doing outside of class. So join the Facebook group, upload your version, and then every month I take a look at all the work that's on there and give some feedback on it. We just did that this past weekend, so another one won't be for a few more weeks for sure. But anyway, let's get a painted ground on today's painting right off the top, and then I'm going to circle back and we'll talk about Rembrandt's biography and the context with which he lived. So before we paint on this here, we're going to... Oops, I want... One second here. Okay, so I'm going to play this video, and this video shows the transfer process of the image as you print off, and I'll just talk over it as it's playing here. So you could print out the image from the Dropbox onto regular photocopy paper from your inkjet, laserjet printer at home or your office printer, and then we're going to transfer it onto a 9x12 sized canvas. And this is just a canvas board. You can get them from the dollar store for $1, or you can order like 25 of them from Amazon for $50. And the ones that I use from Amazon are far superior to the ones at the dollar store. You can also buy them for, you know, $10 at your local art supply, and they're also going to be really great too. I don't know if they're going to be 5 times as good as the $2 ones that I ordered. And if you want to get the ones from Amazon, the link is below. You see that I'm using carbon paper to do this. You can use graphite paper, and you can buy carbon paper. It should be at any art supply store. There's, again, a link in the description to buy some, to order some, and have it delivered to your home. If you can't find it there, then most fabric stores will also sell carbon paper and graphite paper, because that's how a lot of people transfer fabric patterns onto clothes before they sew them. So we're skipping ahead here. Some of these lines on the face here, this is for the shadows, and we'll talk all about the shadows today. I'm probably going to paint over all of that and it'll disappear, but I thought I would just include it there for anyone who might want to just color the drawing in with pencil crayon, for instance. I'm also not going to do every little line here in the outline as well. So that goes on. When it's all done, you've got a canvas, you peel the tape off, and you're left with this image. Now you can see that I had been using that piece of carbon paper for a long time. I think I actually threw it out after I finished that outline because it's starting to get quite faded and the lines aren't quite as visible as they once were. But you know, this is two-sided carbon paper, so I do have the reversed image if I wanted to do that for whatever reason. Anyway, you can save this, you can paint over it, use it as a test. Lots of different things you could do with it. I give them to our daughter to color on. I'm going to now take some warm yellow, which is what I've been doing for over a year now. And this is just warm yellow right out of the tube. If you want to use the same colors that I use a very simple palette, and I did do a video, and the link is in the description, showing exactly how, or the 6 colors that I use. And you could order them, and every company makes these 6 colors. They might be ever so slightly different, but every paint company makes these 6 tubes of paint. And hint, hint, they're usually also offered in larger tubes of paint. If you go to the art supply store, you'll notice that, you know, one brand might have 80 different tubes of paint in little tiny tubes, but they might have 10 different ones that are in really big size tubes or even big jugs. And that should be a hint as to, wonder why they chose those, of all the colors, to put those in the large tubes. It's because artists who really know what they're doing, you know, are going to buy, and if they're going to be making lots of paintings, they're going to buy in volume, and they're going to buy the colors that you only really need, which are these colors. Anyway, I've made that mistake too. When I first got out of art school, I started selling a lot of art and was like, oh, now I'm going to actually go and buy all the really cool greens and purples and oranges and have all these different expensive paints, which is what the art supply companies do. The rather than the big pharma or military industrial complex, it's the the paint company. There's got to be a clever name for it. The giant, massive web of conspiracies orchestrated by the world's evil empire of acrylic paint manufacturers for the that are all deeply connected into and run by lizard people and the Knights Templar, etc. All kidding aside, you know, it is. I am being a little bit using a lot of hyperbole here. There are uses for other colors that I don't use, and that's usually for if you're doing a lot of painting with one particular color rather than mixing your green together. It certainly saves a little bit of time just to go right to the, you know, I guess the difference would be if you were running an industrial sized kitchen, it would be a lot easier to just get pre-peeled garlic rather than hiring somebody to sit there and peel garlic cloves for hours and hours and hours and hours, right? So, the giant cabal of acrylic paint manufacturers. Okay. What I've done is I put a colored ground on my painting, and this is particularly useful. Artists have been doing this since the Renaissance. This is called your imprimatura. The Italians kind of came up with it and used it particularly for landscape and for portrait painting. Did they use a bright, super saturated, warm yellow like I've just applied? No, absolutely not. Not at all. Zero chance they did this, because pigments like this didn't even exist back then. They used mostly a rusty brown, reddish brown color. And why am I using this warm yellow as opposed to a warm rusty brown? Because this comes right out of a tube, boom, 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 onto the canvas, ready to go, especially for beginner painters. This simplifies the whole process. We're not spending the first 20 minutes mixing a really nice brown and putting it on here. Boom, it's on the canvas. The other thing is I really like this warm yellow glow, and particularly for an artist like Rembrandt, who is famous for the kind of the warmer hues that come through his paintings. I think this seems maybe more appropriate than almost any other artist. Rembrandt's palette was very, very limited. He often he barely used blue, he barely used green, except for in some very isolated instances. I mean, there is blue, but not big areas of blue that we might see in a lot of other people's art. Even other people's art at the same time. It's just a stylistic thing of Rembrandt. So while this dries, let's take a quick little look at the biography of Rembrandt. So born in 1606 and lives to the age of 63 and dies in 1669. Rembrandt famously never leaves the Dutch Republic or Holland or the Netherlands as we know them today, which is kind of interesting. When I was thinking about that, it reminded me of Shakespeare, who, if I have my grade 12 English class memory, Shakespeare never left England. Or, again, there's some people who dispute who if Shakespeare even existed, that kind of stuff. But it is interesting that Rembrandt never left his home country, which is also considering Rembrandt became, during his lifetime, one of the most celebrated artists alive and would certainly have had the opportunity to travel. He decided not to, because a lot of artists would, at this point in time, would travel to Italy, go and study from the great master Renaissance paintings that were on display. There wasn't really major museums as we know them today, but as an artist, you could get permission to go into some of these palaces and see the original major paintings of the time. But Rembrandt did not do that. And in my description, as I posted on the Facebook group, I don't know if anyone's talked about this, but just thinking about Rembrandt over the past few weeks at getting ready for today's show, it is really interesting that Rembrandt is one of the things that Rembrandt is most the major contribution that he left, not just to art but arguably to society in general, is he was really amongst the first, if not the first, artist to turn his gaze toward himself. So rather than painting princes and kings, even though he did both, and portraits of wealthy people, he is probably more so than any artist of all time famous for his self-portraits. And not just any kind of self-portraits, because there were artists who made self-portraits before him, but he painted portraits of himself, warts and all, without any sort of, today we think of celebrities taking these, glitzy photos, selfies of themselves, and then spending all this time fixing them up so they look super glamorous. Rembrandt would be the opposite of that. He's the opposite of your Kim Kardashian. He's somebody who's taking photos, or I guess paintings of himself, but he is really looking at himself and like going into like painting all the parts of himself that most people would be like, yeah, I don't know, that's not really, I don't want to look like that. I want to look a little bit more, proper, and I want to present my best foot forward. Rembrandt did not do that. He painted himself as he was, and it makes me think of like how that inspired hundreds and hundreds of years of novelists and playwrights, filmmakers, even journalists, and like to place himself in the center of the artwork. And so then what's interesting is thinking about this guy who went inward, never traveled out of the country, right? The gaze is turned inward, and he's really, diving deep into his own self and who he is, right? And I think that is really what we tend to think of as the beginning of the modern period of art. Begins maybe 200 years after he died, when artists are exploring themselves. But Rembrandt is here 200 years even before that's happening. So he's really the guy, if you want to think of like very few artists or people in general have had the effect on humanity that Rembrandt had. I think when I was reading this a few weeks ago, I remember there was a great quote someone had. Okay, here's this quote here I just want to highlight from Auguste Rodin. Rodin is the famous sculptor of The Thinker. You may have seen that image many times. Rodin says here, "Compare me with Rembrandt? What sacrilege! With Rembrandt, the colossus of art, we should prostrate ourselves before Rembrandt and never compare anyone with him." Right? And that's, Rodin is arguably the greatest sculptor of all time. And he's saying dude, you can't even put me in the category of Rembrandt. Rembrandt is a step above all of these people. So we're going to try to make a Rembrandt painting today, folks. We're going to try to paint this sort of the Zeus on Mount Olympus. We're going to climb up onto that mountain and try to put ourselves in the shoes of this great master today, which is totally absurd. We'll talk about his biography here in a second, but I just want to kind of point out a couple of things along this line here. One of which is Rembrandt is painting during what is known as the Dutch Golden Age, and there's obviously here the Dutch Golden Age of painting, but the Dutch Golden Age is a age that transcends painting, and also is because basically Holland at this time throughout the entire 1600s becomes the wealthiest country in Europe, and there's all sorts of factors related to this. But you can imagine a country that is all of a sudden becoming extremely wealthy has ripple effects all throughout society. And one of which is many of the people who were formerly quite poor all of a sudden start having a little bit of wealth, right? And all of these people are now interested in potentially buying paintings. Maybe they're not, Rembrandt's parents, his mother was the daughter of a baker. His father was a miller, somebody who works in one of these big, kind of like a windmill grinding flour, which you would think are like fairly low-level jobs. But even them rose through the middle class and became an upper middle class family because of the wealth that was being spread throughout the country. And that effect has a lot of people becoming way more educated than they had been any time previously. And it also causes this major shift in the relationship between religion and people, where the country sort of moves from this strictly devout Catholic to embracing some more Protestant values, of which, rather than sort of venerating the church, it becomes more of like a more individual connection to God, and the people become the demand of painting images of Jesus and working for the church is lessened, and artists now are more and more free to express themselves and their own interests. And Rembrandt is sort of in the perfect place at the perfect time. Let's see here. This is the Wikipedia on his work. I think another thing, just before because we're going to start painting this in a second, I promise, but another thing that is worth just looking at very briefly, because especially in today's painting, this is maybe the key word that we might want to take away from today, is the chiaroscuro. The chiaroscuro, right? Chiaroscuro is an Italian word, if you didn't get my incredible Italian pronunciation. Chiaroscuro is essentially, if you want to just think it in terms of like the fastest way of describing it, is sort of theatrical lighting, the extreme contrast between light and dark. And probably the most famous artist here is Caravaggio. Oh, is there a Caravaggio painting? We were talking about Chiaroscuro. We don't even have a Caravaggio. No? Okay, let's see. We have to take a look at Caravaggio. Okay. Because Caravaggio is the artist most closely associated with Chiaroscuro, although there were artists before him and obviously since that used it. But let's see. Caravaggio, so for instance, made lots of paintings like this, where they look like theatrical scenes, or what is the word, like a living, what are those living portraits called? Oh, there's a name for it, just escapes me. Vida. So there's sometimes it used to be more common to see people all dressed up, and they would kind of hold the pose of famous paintings. So it kind of has this kind of moment frozen in time, or it looks a lot like photography, or film noir, movies from the 1940s and 50s. This extreme contrast of light and dark, where we have like people's bodies appearing to just disappear into the shadows. So Yeah, I see in Heidi's saying right here, it seems that Dutch Golden Age paintings are pretty dark. I wouldn't say all of them are pretty dark, but maybe it's a feature, particularly of Rembrandt. Rembrandt loves this extreme contrast, and maybe, at least in terms of his portraits, no more so than in this painting. And he's like 22 years old. He's a young, he was quite successful quite early. He, by this time, not only has his own studio, so he'd been apprenticing with other artists since age 13, and at this point, he's 22, he's now actually mentoring other artists. So now he's got students coming in, and he's mentoring them, they're apprentices to him, and that's a whole other thing that we'll talk about throughout today's episode, because of the fact that Rembrandt has people working for him, it's caused all sorts of confusion for the past 400 years as to whose paintings are whose. Are they paintings by Rembrandt, or the quote-unquote school of Rembrandt, or the workshop of Rembrandt? Right, so we'll get into all that because it's a fascinating thing that doesn't bother me, but curators and collectors, auction houses, it drives them absolutely bonkers, right? Okay, so let's get to this painting. Let's put some paint on our palette and get to rockin'. We're going to put all the paint from our limited series of colors onto the palette because we're going to use them all. Again, even though Rembrandt did not use a lot of blue, he would have had a little bit of it, and it would have been very expensive, and so he would have only used it if he absolutely had to. Probably only during situations where a collector would pay for it. So, you know, Rembrandt lives at a time where artists are basically not just painters, but chemists as well. And in order to make a color, you can't just squeeze it out of a tube and then start painting with it. You're literally grinding pigments. So you would go to what would, you know, basically is like a pharmacy, if you would imagine, and it has a whole bunch of shelves full of little jars and bottles, and you'd say, I want 3 scoops of dead beetles, right? Because beetles could be crushed up to make a red, like a carmine red, like the red that we're about to put down right here. So you would get a whole bunch of dead, dried beetles, and then you'd go back to your studio and you'd crush them up and you'd mix it with a bunch of different fluids. And after a little while, it would turn into something kind of like this, right? So the fact that I can just open up a tube of paint, squeeze it out, and then just start painting, if Rembrandt was alive today, he would just be sitting here watching this video and thinking like, wow, that just blows my mind. I can't believe that you guys can do that these days. Man, if I didn't have to spend all this time grinding all my own pigments, just imagine how much art I could have made. And Rembrandt is very famous for being super prolific and making a ton of art. So you can only imagine if he lived today how much art he would have been able to create if he didn't spend probably, you know, it wouldn't be too much to say he would have spent about 30 to 50% of his time in the studio just grinding pigments. Now, that would have also been the job of his assistants, of his apprentices. You know, when you would back then work for another artist, your job would be to help prep the paints and pigments and canvases and boards and paint brushes, all that kind of stuff. You'd be the one who'd go down to the pharmacy and buy all that. But you know, sometimes you wake up late at night and you want to make a painting. You'd have to go around lighting a bunch of candles, and then you start making your painting. But he would have been doing some of that work himself, right? So let's look at this painting and think how we're going to do this. Okay, I'm gonna get my tea out here while I think about this. This is my yerba mate. This is about as close as I come to any kind of chemistry in my life. loose leaf tea. Okay. So, a few things that I think are happening here. The first thing is that Rembrandt is often famous, particularly as he gets older, for a fairly thick application of paint, or what we call impasto, right? So what I'm seeing here, like in the background, is a fairly thickly applied or very loosely gestural application of paint. And you can see, like, this almost looks like a palette knife, even though I know he didn't use a palette knife here. But, you know, when we've talked about some of the other artists that use palette knives, the paint, they're so thick that it's sort of skipping over little bits, and so that's what I'm seeing a lot of here. This down here, I think this tells us what the color of the canvas looked like. And I don't know if this is on canvas or panel or board or, you know, what type of surface. Let's just say canvas for our sake. I thought here I might have seen a little bit of canvas texture. Anyway, but this gives us an idea that it's a little bit of a brown that he painted. That rust brown that is underneath this. So we're going to paint that here in a moment. And let's see if we can deduce what is underneath all of this white. I don't know what's under that. Maybe it's the same brown, perhaps? So that might be the next step that we take here, is applying that kind of rusty brown over top of everything. Very interesting. The other thing, especially with the hair, what we can see here is he probably did most of the painting, then painted this kind of grayish, greenish color, fairly neutral color, but then he's gone in with probably the back side of his brush, so not the front, you know, where the bristles are, the hairs, but turned it around and is probably using the back side of his brush to scrape paint off. Which is really fun to do, but is also very hard to do with acrylic paint, because acrylic paint just dries so darned fast. Now, this paint could have taken weeks to dry, so he would have had ample opportunity to do that with oil paint, but so that's going to be interesting. When we get to that point, I'll have to think of how we could simulate that effect, because it would be kind of fun to do a little bit of it. Okay. And in the face, there's so much thick layers of paint, it's pretty hard to figure out what it is. But again, I think, see this color in the hair? I bet you that's like the foundational surface like that we have here. So let's do that. Let's now mix this brown that we see everywhere in the painting. And again, you might say, well, maybe we should have just done that to begin with. We could have, but this color we put down here is still going to mix in with that brown and give us a nice kind of bright, warm color. So what we're going to do is we're going to make this warm, rusty color. So let's take our warm yellow. In fact, I'm just going to do this on the previous palette that I have here. So I'm going to use a little bit thicker application of paint. Let's take a bit of warm red. We're not going to need too much of it. That's why I'm going to put it off to the side here. And then I'm going to take a bit of warm blue and put it again off to the side. So let's just mix this up. And I think we're actually pretty close. My only concern is, will we have enough of this to go over the whole canvas? Maybe. I don't really want to put too much more water in here, so we'll see. Maybe we'll be able to get let's actually just take one more look. So I'm looking at this down here. Mine's still a little bit orangey. So let's take a bit more. Warm red here. And that just went a little bit too red. I think that's better. If we're going to do this, let's do it right. So I think that's pretty close. Now it's going to darken this canvas for sure. That's okay. So now my goal is not to make like the most totally even, perfect surface here. It's just to get this color on here underneath all of the other paint. I think it looks a little bit brighter on it. It looks definitely much brighter on camera than it actually is. Like, I think if you could see when I hold my hand over it, it obviously gets darker, and I can still see my pencil lines on there. So, in fact, in person, I think it looks a little bit more like that, depending on how your own computer screen looks like. Anyway, I'm going to keep it a bit brighter. Now I've got my... Now, turned all those dials. I'm not sure exactly which one was the one I normally use, so anyway. Okay. So... I'm just going to take a moment here. I'm just anal retentive, and I just want to clean up my studio space with all of that color there. It could get distracting later on, so all of that bright, rusty color, I'm just removing it. Okay. Cool. Oh boy. Heidi was painting Mickey Mouse until 4 a.m. today. Oh my goodness, Heidi. You are a painting machine. All of you guys are painting machines. So, let's take a look at the painting again and just think about what the next step will be now that we've got we painted our initial imprimatura, and then we've just put down this foundational, another, I guess you could call it another colored ground on top. I still, you know, I know that yellow color is coming through and affecting the color that we see right here, which is, I love personally. I know some purists watching this have already tuned out because they're just like, this is ridiculous. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Maybe that's true. But, okay, so next thing here. What I think we should do is now put some darker outlines onto some of the facial features so that we can see them. This painting is going to get very dark, right? I mean, it sounds pretty straightforward, but even though there's shadows here, we still see some of these details. So we're going to paint them in and then progressively start darkening many of these areas, as well as lightening the areas. And if you recall the painting we did just the other day, the Van Gogh skeleton, we started kind of in the middle with our middle values and then started to expand outwards until we got to basically pure white and our darkest color. We didn't use any black, but basically the black that we can make with these paints, right? Which is black enough for most people. So we're going to do the same thing today. I am going to blow dry this painting really quick, just to speed up this process, because this paint is, I put it on, it's a little bit thicker, so it's a little bit wet. So I'm just going to do that, and then I'll mute the microphone for a moment. Okay, so now this is nice and dry. Let's start painting on here. So let's mix our darkest color. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take our cool blue and warm red. I'm just going to mix it right here. Now, Rembrandt would not have done this because he would not have had colors so saturated, right? Again, if Rembrandt appeared out of a time machine into my studio and walked up, hey, how's it going? He would be like, wow, what are these, like, what kind of magic is this? Because the colors they had were much more muted, which is why when people look at, like, classical paintings, they're like, oh, everything looks kind of dark and brown, because that's basically the colors they had, right? And you know, if there was any bright colors in that, that cost would be passed along to the person in the painting or who commissioned it, right? So we say, oh yeah, I want a painting of a really big, bright blue sky, and I want to be wearing like a purple cape. The artist would be like, okay, if you, and they, you know, somebody say like, so how much is that going to cost me? And the artist, like Rembrandt, would say, you know what, if you have to ask me how much it's going to cost to use this blue, this little bit of blue that I have on the shelf here, and that little bit of purple, you can't afford it, basically. Because you're talking, like, you know, in terms of today's values, like the price of a house or something, right? Like extremely expensive pigments. Anyway, we got cool blue, warm red, and you saw I used a little bit of cool yellow as well, because these two colors opposite one another on the color wheel, right? So when they mix together, they get a very, very dark, muddy purple. I put some cool yellow into it, and that cool yellow just pulls this color, whoop, right into the middle where our neutral colors are. So this is basically the darkest color we can get. And also the color with the least amount of saturation. Which is, I was going to say, is that the same thing? I got to think about that. So now I'm just going to take a small brush and let's zoom in. Again, it's hard to see maybe at first where these lines are. It's going to look like magic when I start painting. Like, wow, he's just painting a face out of nowhere. Wow. And then you're like, oh, I see his hand there. Oh, it's all, he's tricked us. So The point here is I'm just going to very quickly paint in some major lines before these lines start getting obliterated. So let's... This gives you an idea of what we're looking at in this painting here. So does that mean we're going to lose a bunch of very small details? Yeah, probably. We're probably going to lose like all these details in the hair, but we're going to make it up as we paint along, right? So I'm just sort of trying to get the outline of where this curly hair goes here. And then when we paint it, we might kind of actually cut in a little bit. Just because some of that background is actually going to be coming through some of these top layers of hair. I mean, this painting is very unusual. Like, it is definitely a bit of him showing off, for sure. And he may have done this potentially as like a tutorial for his students to say, like, here's how you do this technique, and I'm going to use my own face to show you how it's done. And maybe he had 2 or 3 other artists who are probably around the same age working with him, maybe doing their own self-portraits at the same time. And it's entirely possible that some of those paintings are sitting in storage and in some dusty archive somewhere, and we don't even realize that they were painted in the same room with Rembrandt breathing over the shoulder of some young artist, critiquing them and perhaps even painting himself on there, saying like, no, let me grab that brush, let me take that, and I'll show you exactly how it's done. You're doing it wrong, kind of thing. So that kind of thing would have happened all the time. I remember when I was a young art student, when I was in class, I remember we were drawing figures, and I had this great art teacher named Richard Halliday who changed my life. Awesome, awesome teacher. He was definitely one of the teachers that inspired me to become a teacher. And he, I remember he would just walk right up and start drawing on your drawing. He would put like lines through it, and to like, okay, here's what you gotta do, and you're just like, what? I've been working on this drawing for an hour. What are you crazy man? Right? Like, it's one of those things that I don't know if I would feel comfortable doing that today. Like, it would seem like you could probably get fired for doing something like that today, but even when I was an art student, that was very common. It wasn't abusive or anything, but I think for some people it crosses the line of like, oh, you're not supposed to. It's like, but anyway, that's a whole other thing. Okay, so we're going to fill all of this, is going to be covered in shadow in a matter of minutes here, but we're going to build up to that point. So let me think here of our next step. It is really interesting to think about how he would have made this painting. I don't think in this area, I think he realized this area is going to be very dark, so I don't think he put too much time into painting this. That's why I think it, I don't know how it comes across on your screen, but it does look a little bit flat, right? Because it's just basically very, very dark. But in this transitional area here, it's almost like he painted the full face there and then darkened on top of it. Maybe. It's hard to tell. Okay, so I'm gonna darken these eyes real quick. Darken, oops, these nostrils. And maybe just darken that eyebrow just a little bit. Okay. So I think what I want to do next is I'm going to mix a flesh tone, and we're going to start doing some of the mid values, not the bright kind of highlights here, but we're going to go for something maybe a little bit closer to this, these a little bit more of a warmer red. Okay, well, lots of people in the chat now. There's Donna and Paula, Heidi, and John. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm looking forward to seeing if anyone's painting along with me and to see what you end up creating. I'm just going to let's get a little bit more warm yellow on here because I'll need it. So to create this warm value, or warm skin tone hue, let's take some warm yellow. Let's take some warm red, and again I put them a little bit side by side here so that I can manage how. That's probably way too much blue, but I might use it at some point, so I'll just keep it there, right? Let's mix these three colors together. Probably should have put less red in here, but it's okay. Okay. So you can see it's not too far off the color that I have here. In fact, you can use this color as part of the painting, right? That's the whole purpose of doing the imprimatura, is putting this colored ground here, because you could use this, just leave that as it is, maybe like for that cheek or parts of the nose, etc. But having said that, that's not what Rembrandt's doing, because you could see there's lots of layers of paint here. It's a pretty thickly applied paint. Oh, I just noticed this like pure red right there on the earlobe. That's interesting. You see more and more stuff as you go. I'm going to take a bit of white, not much, but just a bit of it. I'm going to start taking this color. It's probably almost invisible on screen there, but just start putting this value all over the mostly over this face. In fact, I'm just going to paint over. Barely noticeable, obviously, right? Now let's take a bit more white. In fact, I'm just going to mix it to the side here. Maybe a bit more yellow. And you can see when I add more white to it, it becomes like this Caucasian flesh tone instantly, right? As opposed to the previous color, which is much darker. So let's take this, and we'll start seeing, obviously, quite the change instantly. I think I want just a bit more of a pinkish quality here. So I'm kind of painting a little bit up into the face, even though the shadow is going to overlap down here. Because it's not like there's no skin in the shadow, right? I'm going to paint a little bit in and underneath this hair. I'm going to put this on those lips too. It's interesting. As I look in the shadow, that has got like, there's a bit of white on here, like white mixed into that paint. It makes me contemplate wanting to put a bit of this there as well, but maybe, but I'll do that as a separate color, not this color we just applied. Okay. So as I'm painting and getting closer to this darker side, it's just like a dry brush. Just leaving little bits of pigment in that area. And we're going to build up successive layers of paint in this area, so don't worry about getting it perfect just yet. Because right now, especially on camera, there's all of this red, and it's a little bit like overwhelming, confusing to see exactly what's going on. So, you know, we're going to just establishing these kind of base hues. Let's go up to the hair now, and I think we're going to start blocking in some of these things, and I think it's going to change, and you'll be like, oh, okay, this is starting to make more sense. So now let's make it a warm brown. Basically what we did here, but we're just going to make it a little bit darker, and I'm going to save this mixture for the face. So I'm just making basically this a very similar color, but in a different place on my palette, so that I'm kind of preserving that one color. And I'm adding more blue to this mixture, which is going to make it go darker. So we just have a much darker brown. Oops. Maybe even. That was a lot more blue. I didn't mean to go quite that dark. I don't mind it. Don't mind it. I just have to kind of. It's like I just added a little bit too much salt in my soup, and I just gotta. If find a few other ways to... I'm just going to double the recipe a little bit. Okay. So you can see exact same colors that were in here, that are in here, just different ratios, right? A lot more blue, a little bit less yellow, right? And that's how we get this color. Really nice brown. And let's go in and paint that in here. I'm just gonna really quickly blob all of this. You know, Rembrandt, as I mentioned, was, from a technical point of view, like absolutely, you know, a master, like undisputable. I don't think there's, you could not, there's no one, if you asked a million different artists, even artists who paint abstractly, and who have at least some knowledge of like art process or materials, every single one of them would probably say Rembrandt is an undisputed master, and arguably better than anyone who's lived at any point in human history. And I think what's interesting about him is just like his mastery of... he probably painted most of his paintings very quickly. And again, if you think of like the restrictions and how difficult it would be to make paintings back then, it's just like mind-boggling, absolutely mind-boggling. How like it just makes me exhausted thinking of like how difficult making a painting would have been 400 years ago. Like I was thinking about this today. Like if I lived 400 years ago and I had to jump through all of these ridiculous hoops in order to make a painting, would I be a painter? I don't think so. It's just my brain does not work like that. I'm not someone whose idea of like fun is sitting in the like grinding all these pigments. There are artists today who love investigating the processes of old artists and research the materials and go out and buy all the raw materials and try to grind it all together themselves. That is not something that interests me at all. Okay. So now I'm looking at this. I have no idea how he painted that. That is just, it's so weird. As I look at it, it makes me think of... It's almost like the paint is really, really sticky, and as opposed to like very fluid and wet, which is generally what most people want to use when they're painting. It's almost like it's what would it remind me of? Like molasses. You know, like if you would imagine trying to dip your paintbrush into molasses and try to paint with. That's just on a visual perspective. I have no idea how this was made, but that background looks like it was sort of painted with a white or grayish molasses. Okay, now I'm going to paint something in that background, but I don't think I'm going to go right to this gray color yet. I want to put something else there first. And... you know, I look at it, I see this kind of these yellows in here. Maybe maybe a coolish brownish blue, perhaps. So I'm just gonna put that on here. And this, what I'm about to do is something that Rembrandt would not have been able to do himself. So again, you can throw your arms up and but just for our sake, we'll make a dark a cool brown for the background. Maybe we could put that white in right now, instead of just fiddling and doing so many layers, so this painting doesn't take all night long. Maybe we'll make the... I know I'm going to do 2 layers here because I think it kind of needs it. So I'm going to take this cool blue, take a bit of cool yellow and cool red. And this is the color I'm going to mix up. It's kind of like a Prussian blue. Maybe let's... Should I go right there? Let's do this. Let's put this white on. Yeah, I'm kind of digging the way that looks. So again, this is cool yellow, cool blue, and a little bit of cool red. So basically we've just created like a Prussian blue. And I'm going to paint this in here. Now obviously you're like, whoa, totally different color than we see in the painting, Michael. You got it totally wrong. Are you blind? Maybe. But I'm also going to modify it again later and take some of the intensity of this blue, but that blue will also help these colors recede. Now I know someone just tuning in right now is going to say, whoa, you obviously know nothing about Rembrandt, because Rembrandt would never have used this color. Not only would this color have been prohibitively expensive, but it's just not his way of working. And I'd go, yes, thank you. Obviously you haven't been watching the past hour of the video, which I don't expect anybody to do, but I'm just... If we were to try to make this painting exactly like he did again, we would be going out and collecting bugs and getting things shipped by camel from Afghanistan, and it would just be... So, you know, there's already tons of concessions made here. And also I just wanted to tackle that background and get just seeing that big empty expanse of brown and reddish rusty color was... It also makes it difficult to see the image in the inside, right? It's just sort of so overwhelming. And maybe while I'm applying white, I'm gonna take a little bit of this white. Let's maybe even take a bit of our brown and white. And you know what? While I'm right here, and I'm gonna paint a little bit of white in these eyes. Now that's going to disappear eventually, but I wanted a little bit of highlights there as we continue to darken that area. Now, I think let's start going. I think I'm going to now take a gray and put a gray into this dark side of the face. So rather than just a black, I'm putting a bit of gray, almost like greenish gray here. So let's, how should we make that? Let's take warm yellow, warm blue, so now we've got, again, Rembrandt would not really have used green much at all. This is just what I'm seeing in the painting. And then I'm going to take my dark color and mix it in here. So this is my dark color that I'm basically turning into a very dark greenish gray. And I'm just going to go to a smaller brush here. So now I'm kind of dry brushing here, just sort of allowing the last little bit of paint before I dip. I'm going to put a little bit more down there. But while it's dry, just rubbing it around. Okay, let's get a little bit more and do this. Dry brushing in there. maybe actually I'm going to bring a bit of that down here too. Okay. So what that does is it dulls that area out, and when we start glazing over, I think it's going to give a really nice, a little bit of warmth, oddly enough, in that area. And it'll still have a bit of, almost give it an effect of slight reflected light back onto that side of the face, even though it's dark. Now, I don't know if exactly he did that. Again, as I said, Rembrandt barely used red or blue, or at least not very frequently, as like the finished layer of the painting, but it doesn't mean that he wouldn't use some of those colors underneath other layers. So, let's see. I think we should now start getting much darker in the clothes and in the hair here. And I'm going to take my dark color. Here, remember, this is my color that I used warm blue and cool red to make. And I think I'm going to take just a bit of the brown, so it's not going to be totally dark, but pretty dark. Okay, and let's go into some of these areas right alongside the face here. So what I'm trying to do is get the hair that's closest to his head, that is dark, and we can't see down to the depths of his skull. So I'm going to leave some areas a little bit thinner than others. So that's why I'm kind of dry brushing this a little bit. Let's look down here in the bottom. Let's do the same thing. Let's take some of this brown. Notice how these aren't the thickest layers just yet. He probably would have used maybe thicker, big areas of color, but again, he's using oil paints and okay. Maybe let's just take this dark color and even just start going over that white a bit. Just dirtying it down a bit so that it's not so prominent. And just that's maybe a bad idea to start doing some of this dry brush up here, just because you can see it kind of creates some little bit of marks up there. So maybe I won't do too much more of that there. What are you looking for?
The rain cover for the stroller.
It would be somewhere by the stroller. Deborah says, "Hi everyone, I just woke up so I missed the beginning. Hi Donna, so nice to see you here." Heidi says, "Hi Deborah, we're on different shifts." Like, you're somebody's on the night shift, Heidi's on the night shift, Donna's just waking up. Or Heidi's on the late shift, Donna's on the kind of the evening shift. Or Deborah's on the evening shift. And John is from Westchester, New York. Okay. Cool, you guys. So this is, you know, if you wanted to now switch to oil paint, this might be the time to do that, right? We've now got a pretty good, solid underpainting for the rest of the painting that we can do. And there's lots of different ways that we can approach the remaining part of the painting, which I want to try to finish in about another hour and a half at the very, very most. But if you want to just finish it in acrylic paint, which is what I'm going to do, then that's fine. But I know a lot of people will paint the foundational underpainting in acrylic paint, and then finish it with oils. Okay. Wow. So let's build up a little bit more of this cheek and the nose and lips. Maybe let's put in a little bit of a... Let's see, I need some more warm red here. Warm red and this blue. Or sorry, the kind of skin tone. One thing I've always found interesting about Rembrandt is how all of his figures, man and women, all kind of start to look a lot like Rembrandt paintings, which is not unusual. Often artists, when we paint people, they tend to kind of look a lot like ourselves. But I think Rembrandt in particular, and I think that might be also just because of how many self-portraits he did over the years and how that kind of starts to influence the rest of the paintings he makes. Okay, I think what I'm going to do next, I like this kind of red, but if I just put it right... I need a little bit of more brushability, so I'm going to mix it in with some glazing fluid. So I can just get a little bit more subtlety here. I'm even just going to glaze a little bit of that in the shadows too. Have to be careful. It looks like this is not totally dry, so. And I might come back. There's a nice, that little warmth in there is pretty cool. Okay, so let's go the opposite direction and start getting a little bit more of this blue-green that's in some of the shadows too. So I think we can actually even just use this color that we created earlier. But let's just modify it a little bit. Let's take some warm blue, warm red, and warm yellow. So we just got this kind of warm green here. I'm going to take a bit of that dark color that we had there previously again. So this is like a bluish brown, warm bluish brown. And let's put some glazing fluid nearby. And I'm actually going to blow dry this canvas here because not everything here is dry. And if I start trying to glaze over areas that aren't dry, I end up actually pulling paint off, scrubbing paint off the surface. Okay, so where's my hairdryer? There we are. It's going to mute the microphone. So one of the things that I often do, and sometimes this is often when I'm actually painting and looking, I often will be squinting my eyes looking at things. Because when you squint your eyes, everything kind of goes a little bit fuzzy, and we stop seeing all the details, and we just see the shapes, and often sort of the overall color, right? So like, for instance, if I look at this with my eyes closed, or almost close, squinting, I don't see the bright red blobs of paint that are by... Oops, sorry, you can't see what I'm talking about. I don't see the red on the ear here. It just looks sort of like a very dark, almost a bit of a cooler red, especially down there. So it's like I don't get confused by the little tiny spots of color. I'm seeing more overall colors, and that's what I'm trying to do right now, is try to get overall shapes of color. So now I'm going to take this color I just mixed, mix it into my glazing fluid. We'll start with a fairly subtle glaze, and then I think I'll go into the rest of the face and glaze that and darken it after a bit here. And you can use a blending brush to soften out some of those marks if you like. So this is very, very subtle. How did I get red on everything? Oh, I have red on my table. That's right. Okay, so then I'm going to go in here and just get a bit more paint into this glaze so it becomes a little bit stronger. Put that in here, but it's kind of a little bit of a waste because it's going to get much darker anyway. Okay, I should blow dry this because right now I'm already seeing some of the paint that I've applied with that previous glaze is kind of coming up. I'm pulling it off. So I need to stop and, oops, and blow dry this for a moment. Okay, let's just keep on going. Getting a little bit darker as we go. Oops, sorry. Come on. Okay. So let's blow dry that again. Right, so this paint is kind of a little bit sticky because I've used it and mixed it into color for a bit, so, and the color's kind of changing as I mix it around. I don't mind that. I kind of like that it's got slightly more blue or a little bit more kind of red in there. take this glaze and put it down here, even though it's a little bit redundant, but why not build this part up with the same level of subtlety? So this is a brush stroke that got kind of caught in there. That's okay. It's just going to keep on getting darker and darker as we go. Okay, I'm just going to wash this brush that I've been glazing with for a little while, just because it gets, you know, it's starting, there's paint on it, it gets dry, and it's getting paint on it, and it gets dry, and sometimes that can lead to just like these, what would you call it, like as if it's like a lizard shedding its skin, these little bits of like a, you know, if you leave milk out overnight, like homogenized milk, you might form like a little layer, like kombucha layer kind of thing. And yeah, so let's blow dry this again. Okay, let's go the opposite way. We've been getting darker and darker and darker. Now let's brighten part of this up. So let's use a slightly smaller brush, and I can go back. This color's kind of dried a lot, so I still have a bit of it. This was warm yellow, warm red, and warm white. Or sorry, warm yellow, warm red, warm blue, and white. And let's just see. Not bad, maybe a bit more white. And let's take some glazing fluid and do the same thing. Yeah, let's just go a little bit more white right off. I'm just to speed up this process. You know, a painting like this with Rembrandt might have taken dozens of coats, but I want to try to wrap up in a timely manner. So I'm just going to kind of skip ahead a bit. So I'm going to blow dry this. We are going to put some of this white glaze back over top of some of the dark areas, which seems, because it's not like we have two puzzle pieces that come together and they're totally distinct. We're sort of layering them a little bit over top, right? And kind of some dark over top. And it's complex, it takes some time, but it builds up a really cool effect. On going here. Starting to pull some paint off there, so I gotta leave that. And let's blow dry again. So I'm just looking at an angle there just to see if there's any shiny parts. That is usually a sign that something is still a little bit wet. So I think I'll do one more glaze with, I'm going to add even more white to this mixture. Don't like how that turned out. So that's an area of paint that was a little bit wet, so darn it. Okay, I think that might be for right now all of the light highlights. There might be a few final big blops of paint as highlights, but now I'm going to darken everything quite radically. Okay, actually, just that little bit. Oh, got worse. Come on. So I'm sort of like doing a little fine touching with the glaze just to cover up some areas that were a little bit harsh, like little lines. And this is just very subtle. It's like almost like using an erase, the inverse of an eraser. I'm like, rather, because I can't erase it, I'm sort of painting it a little bit lighter by like 2%, 3% at a time. Okay. Deborah says, Michael, I really like how you do the blending. I appreciate that. You know, it's just very, you know, using a mop brush to kind of soften all those marks. And also, obviously, using, if I didn't mention it before, sorry, the satin glazing fluid, right? That's, should be a major part of any acrylic painter's toolbox. Then Heidi says, I don't know how to make sense of Rembrandt painting a self-portrait so dark that his features are barely visible. I think, you know, earlier in the episode we were just talking about, you know, he made this when he was 22 years old. He has some apprentices working for him at this point in his studio, which is a little bit on the rare side to be that young and to have to be a mentor to other artists. But I think it's entirely possible that he did this painting as a demonstration to other artists who were working for him, and also as a bit of a bravura kind of thing, like, because artists, you know, there were some kind of art galleries roughly at that time. Rembrandt bought other people's art and also sold other people's art, and often you'd have people come to your studio, to your house. That was kind of like your art gallery at the time, right? There's not that many people who would be able to afford a Rembrandt painting. And when they would come in, they might see like a painting like this and go like, wow, that is incredible. You know, it's not for sale. It's a self-portrait I use to demonstrate to my students how to get some of these really, really strong shadows. But it's not for sale. But it's kind of there to like, whoa, wow people when they came in and be like, oh, this guy's the real deal, right? So it's part of, it's like the, you know, if you go to a car dealership, they might have one really expensive, souped up model of a car, even though you're just planning on buying a Toyota Camry or Prius or something, but they have like the big fancy sports car that lures you into the showroom, and then you're like, oh, how much does that cost? Oh, $250,000. Okay, how about that used one with the bumper hanging off? How much is that? Oh, okay, 20,000. Yeah. Um, you know, the $250,000 car, that one. You know, I think maybe next summer I'm gonna get the one with the you know, I obviously I can afford that, but I'll just for fun, you know, we'll get this one, the dinged up one, right? Yeah, I mean, and yeah, I'll think about that more expensive one. Thanks for showing it to me. The test drive was awesome. Uh, so I think it's the same sort of thing. Like he's doing this as an attempt to show people the effect and his own range of ability. Okay, so now let's really, or you know what? Maybe before I go right down into super dark, let's do just a little bit of work in the hair here. And I'm gonna take maybe like even my light. So actually I'm gonna take this glaze color, a bit more white to it, and just because I want to get a little bit of, maybe even a bit more white. What I want to do, since I'm not going to be able to kind of use the back side of my brush, like, because the way that he's doing these curls is he's actually scraping with the back side of his paintbrush, right? And he's carving out the paint and to get that effect. We can't do that with acrylic paint because this paint is already dry, and if I tried to do it, it would look pretty awful. It would just be scraping up all of this paint. And so what I'm doing is adding this kind of a quite a light color here, because when we glaze over it, it'll still appear, it's just going to look really dark. Let's take a bit more, some red, blue. I'll just blow dry that real quick. Okay, let's take some of this glazing fluid off of here. Maybe I'll just take a bit more. Okay, I'm gonna go right into some of my, this is my darkest color. And I'm going a little bit outside onto the background a bit. Actually, I should probably, you know what, start thinking about doing the yellow back, or the white back there. I think we'll do this layer of glaze. I'm going to paint the background. Okay. And it's going to take this dark color, even more glaze, and let's just go back over some of this hair. Maybe let's, well, I still got some of this. Let's just go right down onto his jacket. Oh, I keep forgetting to put that color right there. What is that? Maybe let's do that real quick. That's a kind of a grayish color. So let's take some white. You can actually see where he glazed this right there. Very interesting. I'm gonna get some glazing fluid on my brush. Okay, so let's do the background, and then we're gonna go darken the face, do a little bit of the hair, and then I think we'll be pretty close to being done. So that color, you know, it's not too far off what we just painted here. So it's there's going to be some light gray and then some darker gray. So I think we actually will paint the light gray over everything, glaze with it, and then we'll come back and darken parts of it. So again, let's take, oops, I think I got to mix more of that, my dark color. My dark color is cool blue. Let's make a bunch of it. Warm red. And cool yellow. That's a bit of a on the brown side because there's a lot of yellow and red in there. A little bit more blue. I think we need a bit more red. There we go. So I just wiped some of that paint off, and let's take some white and this color, mix it together to get a gray. It's a bit on the purpley side. So again, let's take a bit of not that much cool yellow. There's more and more gray. Okay, I'm going to put some glazing fluid on here so I can maintain a tiny bit of that blue that we put there before. Brushing it on kind of quick, and I'm not too concerned if I got brush strokes. I don't need it to be too solid. I like that there's that blue coming through. Don't want to over brush it because then I'm going to start scraping paint off. That's cool. Cool. So it's got to be a little bit darker. That's okay. We're going to blow dry that. I mean, maybe it's okay right here. Maybe it needs to be actually probably a little bit lighter here and then darker over here. So we'll blow dry. Okay, so let's continue here and take a bit more white. Might be a little much. Let's get rid of all that extra. Let's take some of the darker paint. What am I doing there? Oh, yeah, Michael. Okay. Let's blow dry one more time. Deborah says, Michael and Heidi, could the darkness be caused from aging like the Mona Lisa, and in fact could it have been much lighter? So like in the Mona Lisa had been varnished, and when they cleaned it, it lightens up a little bit, like a lot of paintings with the varnishes, especially older varnishes, are organic pigments, and they will yellow and they'll darken as over the centuries. I actually would say the exact opposite is probably more likely true. Like this area on the face, the fact that, and again, I don't know how you can see how it shows up on your screen, but the fact that this is even really visible at all, to me, I think that's actually because of an over cleaning of this painting, and I think it was actually much darker. It wouldn't have surprised me if we saw this in his studio 400 years ago, that this would have been basically pitch black. And I think it's been lightened more than it actually originally was. So I think actually it's an interesting theory, but I think it's actually the opposite. I think it was a much darker painting at one time, which sounds kind of like, wow, how much darker could it get? But again, he did this purposefully. It's not like it's by accident. This is a technique that artists use. Chiaroscuro is one of the most, like, it would be something he would have learned. The teachers would have showed him. This is like the high point for an artist to be able to pull this kind of thing off. It's very, very difficult to do, and so to be able to pull it off is him showing like how he can do absolutely anything. And it's like a kind of a calling card, a bragging rights. People all over Amsterdam would have come to his studio. Was he in? I'm not sure where he was actually at this exact time. I think, was he? I don't know if he was in Amsterdam yet, but wherever he was, Leiden or something, he that would have been the kind of thing where everyone, all the other artists in town were like, have you heard Rembrandt did this like super dark chiaroscuro self-portrait? You gotta check it out. It's gonna blow your mind. People are like, what? Really? The guy's only 22. Like, he thinks he's better than everybody else in town? I'm telling you, you gotta see it. It's pretty tough, like, to pull that painting off. And so it would have caused like a bit of a sensation, and you would have had people coming from all over to check it out. So it's not by mistake, it's not over varnishing. I think again it's quite more likely the opposite is true. So I'm this is kind of lightening it up just because I let me see, now that I might be going back the opposite way a little bit too much, so see, this is when I start trying to hurry, when I start making a few little gaffes and stuff. My mop brush is now kind of almost useless because it's now just becoming very crusty and so I'm just going to use a different brush to do some of that more softer blending and kind of get these bit of more of that stray hair effect. I'm now kind of, I went a little bit too far in the other direction, but it's okay. So I'm going to blow dry that. We're going to start really darkening all of this even more. Okay, just looking at that painting, I think I need a bit more of like a greenish quality to this background. So mixing this cool green, get a little bit of an aqua thing here, and then mixing it into my dark color. I'm not sure how this will turn out, but there's only one way that I'll ever know, and it's by actually doing it. A little bit closer. It's almost like a warm yellowish brown there on top. So let's blow dry that. Gail says, is there something on his earlobe? I think it's just a very prominent blob of red paint that's on his earlobe. Okay, so I'm going to now go back to, gosh, I need a little more dark color here. We're going to glaze with this in a moment. And let's do this over here. There's a bit of brown in there too. This is my blending brush here. Bit more glazing fluid. Okay, I'm going to blow dry all of this. Getting closer and closer. Okay. Okay. So I'm generously using lots of glazing fluid on here. That background is driving me bonkers. And so I'm trying to bring up this website that I often use to help with color picking. It's in the video description below. There we are. Okay, so I'll just show you what I'm up to here. So I going to this, it's in the description below, this link, and I'm uploading the painting that we're working on today. And I just want to, let's zoom. Come on. and it's telling me what this color is here. So if we're looking here, it's showing me all these colors, so I'm looking, it's all in the same vicinity here. I'm just sort of randomly picking. I'm going to copy that. Okay, that's interesting. So what this is telling me is that this color, it's very close to a gray. It's more brown than I thought. I was trying to mix a bit more of a blue and a bit more of a green. Obviously, I was off. Very deceptive. So this is, I was thinking of probably having to go brown anyway, but so this tells me we're basically an orange brown and a lot of white and gray. Okay, so problem solved. I should have done that earlier when it was giving me trouble, but okay. So let's take this brown color and our darker color and a bit of white. Actually, let's go back to, all right, we're looking for that. I think we need a bit of cool blue in there, perhaps, just to dilute it. I think that's close. So we took our brown. Oops. I think this will be the last time I try to work on this background here. Now it's very much darker, obviously, because there's no more as much white, so maybe I should just glaze much more with it. And we'll just wipe some of it off. So I'm closer to the color, but now it keeps getting darker and darker and darker. So we'll lighten it up a bit. But I gotta blow dry that first. Oops. Sorry, I was a little bit, kept my microphone off there for a bit. I was hoping to be done by now. So, let's put finish the hair. We'll continue darkening this just a little bit more, and then we'll be done. So, this hair, let's go for... a little bit brighter brush strokes here. We'll zoom in. I mean, this is just like virtuosic technique in here, and so it's humbling for sure to be making this painting for me, for sure. Again, all of this is done in the original by using the other side of his paintbrush to scrape oil paint off of the canvas to reveal the original first layer of paint that he put down there. With acrylic paint, we can't really do that unless we were to paint this entire thing with a ton of slow dry medium. And even then, I don't know, I'd be pretty skeptical about using that type of a process here. I mean, it's just incredible. Like, it's blowing my mind trying to make this painting, because it's just like every time I do one thing, I feel like, whoa, okay, that changed the game there. And it's a little disheartening to thinking that he did this when he was 22 years old. Oh, man, if I had been 22 years old and I was able to do something like this, how different life would have been. But you know, we all have a different journey. I don't have any regrets. It's just interesting just thinking about the different journeys that we all have, and just like some people are just now starting to paint at, you know, different times of their lives. I'm thinking about some of the artists we looked at, like Grandma Moses, who didn't start painting until she was in her late 70s. So there's still time for everyone. So this is just warm brown with a little bit, you know, it's probably more a little bit of more warm blue in there just to make it a little bit darker, versus the other one that's a little bit brighter here. It just has a little bit more warm yellow in there. We don't need to do too much to get the same sort of effect that he has in his painting as well, right? You know, there's a little bit of paint sort of showing through, or the white showing through here, so I can just literally kind of paint over top of it with this and kind of hide it a bit. Okay, so as I go around here, like this dark brown that I had works great for this side because that's all these highlights. But as I come over to the other side, I'm going to need to get darker. Now I just do want to kind of put a little bit more maybe I should have done this earlier, but okay, so let's take my darkest color. I'm going to take my dark color. I'm going to use a bit of this glaze. It's been here for a while, so I don't want to go totally dark. But I want to bring back the shape of this face. here's just some glaze to do some of these hairs very lightly, almost invisible. So that other eye is almost gone. Let's put a bit of dark. Ooh, that's a big blob of paint there. This is pretty hard to do because I'm trying to paint these dark areas. I can just barely see what's going on in here. So I'm just noticing his eyes are sort of looking away, so making him look a little bit more towards me. let's zoom back out. There's some kind of a little bit too close in there to see what's happening, so yikes. Some of that's a little dark or too bright, so we'll darken that. The nose needs to be shaped a bit. Might have been a bit much, so let's just take a dry rag and oops, you can't see what I'm doing. That's great, Michael. Great, great, great. Well, you know, I'm starting to get to that point where the returns are diminishing and diminishing, right? Where I could work on this for 2-3 more hours and it could get much better. More than likely it's just going to get 5-10% better. So, you know, I'm like, okay, how much? Oh, now I notice that's, I thought that I was gonna make a pretty soft edge there. I don't mind that soft edge though, so I think I'll keep that. junk on the canvas. Ay, ay, ay. Okay, I think I need to blow dry things. And then I'm going to be pretty close to being done. Like, Okay, I noticed I was picking, I didn't even really pick at it, it was wet paint, or not even wet paint, it was a glaze there, I guess. I'm not sure what happened, but I just ran my fingertip over it and it just peeled up all of this paint, so doing a little repair job down there. Okay. Ay, 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 what is happening? That's a bit scary. I did pull up a bit of paint there, which I didn't want to do. Okay. So I think I might just I'm gonna end here in a moment. My painting on its own, I feel really happy about. It's not until I look at the original I'm like, oh, what's going, like, and I know that's what I tell everybody else, like, stop comparing it to the original, just let it be its own thing. And you know, I just gotta listen to my own advice every once in a while. So what I'm just doing is I'm just getting a bit of like a rouge a little bit here that I want to put. It's a little bit thick, so I'm just going to take it and just take it off my brush. Just, oops, did I get any? Oops, no, I want. Okay. And then let's just get some of these last little bits here. This big bit of kind of blobs of that color. Okay, let's get a bit of this warm red. Let's take this red and a darker color. Nope. It's a bit more glaze. Let's get just a little bit of red here. Ah, I think I'm gonna I gotta walk away at some point, and even though there's more that I could do, it could still be even darker down here, but I don't mind it like that. If I was to spend another few hours on it, I'm sure it would get even better and better and better. So Good enough for government work, right? As my grandfather always used to say. I mean, this is... We literally tackled one of the great paintings by arguably the greatest painter in human history and tried to do it all in, what, 3 hours or so. So, you know, we have to kind of be generous with ourselves, and the likelihood that we were going to do as good or better in probably a tenth of the time is totally absurd, right? So I'm happy with these results, and certainly really interesting trying to paint, because the subtlety of these colors, even the background gave me some fits there. Yeah, I mean, but all in all, I'm pretty satisfied. Like, yeah. So, I just have to remember my paint. I feel good about my painting. Does it look exactly like Rembrandt's? Not really. There's still things we could massage to make it better, but not bad for an evening's work here. As I start picking at this, oh my goodness, Michael. Just walk away. Oh my goodness. There's always little things that you see. Okay. So thank you everyone here. Pablo says hello, love your videos and courses. Thank you so much. Lolly says it looks great. You've smashed it as always. Michael, you've totally hit this one out of the park. No matter the subject, you always nail it, and you've done it again. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Makes me feel better. Thank you everyone for joining me for another painting session. On Thursday, we're going to be painting a character from V from Vendetta. It's a comic book that was released in, I think, 1988 or so. A very important comic book. You probably know the image from V for Vendetta. Most commonly, the image reproduced from it most often is the Guy Fawkes mask. And you've probably seen it on images of riots and protests all across the world ever since. It's a very famous mask, and the reason why we're painting is because it's Guy Fawkes Day, I think on the Friday. So, but technically, when we're painting it, it will be Friday in England, where people celebrate Guy Fawkes Day. Anyway. Thanks again everybody for joining me, for painting along with me. Join the Facebook group. Upload your version of today's painting to the Facebook group. In a few weeks we'll take a look at all that great work and celebrate it and offer some little bits of advice there on how you might be able to improve that. I know some people really love that, so if you want to participate, it's free. All you got to do is just join the Facebook group. Right? There's my ad for Mark Zuckerberg. If you want to contribute to the show, there's a link to a PayPal below. And if you want to send a check or e-transfer or even use the super chat function here in YouTube, you can do that as well. Thank you, everyone. We will see you guys in just a few days. Enjoy your experience of the world until then. And, oh, my app just crashed there. So, a little thing about Rembrandt is he originally signed his name Rembrandt without a D in it. For whatever reason, he added a D kind of around his early 30s. Why did he do that? Such a strange decision to make. You know, I think we're going to do more Rembrandt paintings because there's a lot of his biography that I didn't even get to. Scandals and scandals and scandals. This guy was the worst manager of money you've ever seen. Despite being one of the most famous living artists at the time, he was always on the verge of bankruptcy. Lots of stories to talk about that in the future. So thank you, everyone. We'll continue this at another time. Enjoy your evening. We'll see you soon. Good night, everybody.